It has started. Okay, awesome. Good morning, Horizon. I am so delighted today to be interviewing my good friend, Reverend Gerald Waters, the pastor of Proclamation Community Church right here in Philadelphia. And today is June 19th, Juneteenth. And so I asked my friend Gerald, would you be willing to sit down and talk a little bit about what that means? And then also how we as Christian brothers and sisters can be better allies to our Black family and friends and neighbors and communities here in Philadelphia and in the suburbs. So Gerald, thank you so much for being willing to do this.
Pastor Alex, it's always a pleasure to hang out with you and to be before our Horizon extended family, and just grateful for the time. And so I thank you for just the honor of being able to share some of my thoughts and my experiences, and looking forward to it.
Thank you, Gerald. Yeah, I've learned so much, especially over the last few years. I've been trying to do more listening and learning because I realized there was so much I didn't know. And you've been a great help to me. And so I appreciate your friendship. And I appreciate you always being willing to answer my questions. And sometimes they're dumb questions, but I appreciate you. You're always kind and patient with me. So thank you. Would you start out by just telling people who don't know what Juneteenth is all about? Really, I think the first time I even heard about Juneteenth, and this speaks to my own ignorance, probably only 3 or 4 years ago was the first time I heard about it. And I think it's slowly becoming more mainstream. More people are hearing about it. But would you just explain to us, to those who don't know or maybe aren't quite sure, what's the day all about?
Sure. Thank you. So Juneteenth, and admittedly, more recently is when I started to kind of get into it a little deep myself, meaning when I was in high school and things of that nature, we weren't taught about Juneteenth. I just kind of found out about it through one of my mentors who would celebrate it at this adult senior center that I worked at, and it intrigued me to find out exactly what the roots of it was. So to your point about it not being in the mainstream, that's the reason for so much ignorance about it. But so in essence, what it is that the Emancipation Proclamation that everyone is pretty much familiar with, the proclamation that freed the slaves, was signed in January 1853 by Abraham Lincoln. But there was a group of slaves in Texas, in Galveston, Texas, to be specific, that even after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, they were unaware of their freedom. They were unaware of the Declaration to Free Slaves. And so, we think about communication in contemporary terms, where if there was some information, we just had to pick up the phone and call somebody and share the information. But back then, it wasn't like that. And so 2 years later, they find out that this declaration had been signed for slaves to be free. And the idea of finding out late didn't arise until later on, because the like I said, the way that information traveled and the way that things were communicated back then, they had to go like horse and buggy, literally. And so these group of slaves, these group of people in Texas finds out this information that they were free, and they just celebrate. They celebrated. It was really a time of worship, a time of festivals, because they were very enthusiastic about being free, and how it differed from the people on the East Coast, the Confederate states, finding out about freedom, is a lot of the slaves, when they were freed over in the southern states, it wasn't that celebratory for them, because after they were free, they didn't have places to go, things to do. And so they were happy to have that new status. However, it wasn't as celebratory as it was over in Texas, because they didn't have access to other things that would help them to perpetuate their freedom and help them to be able to walk in their freedom. So this group over in Galveston decided to celebrate June 19th when they got the announcement that they were free. Um, and it really has implications now because there's a lot of people who are still the implications, rather, I'm sorry, are gospel implications, because it reminds me of the fact that there are so many people who are free, who can be free because of what Jesus Christ has done for us, but somebody has to tell them.
Yeah.
And so I see the whole evangelistic piece connected to Juneteenth. So in essence, that's what the holiday was all about, just celebrating a freedom that they received, albeit late, but they still got it, and they were happy about being released.
Awesome. Yeah. I love how you tied that into the gospel as well, that people don't realize the freedom that they have. Yeah, thank you. I did some research heading into this, obviously on my own, but you're already teaching me things, Gerald. So thank you.
Yeah.
Growing up, and this isn't something I've talked about real publicly, but my grandfather was a racist. He subscribed to white supremacist newsletters and had a Confederate flag out and used racial slurs, and just a really angry, hate-filled man. And growing up, I knew I didn't want to be like that. And I thought, well, as long as I'm not that, I'm good. And it was almost like a neutral space, you know? And then the last few years, I've heard more and more about being not just not racist, but actually being anti-racist. And so I've been trying to think more and more about, like, okay, I knew I didn't want to be like my grandfather. He was racist. But I found myself more in a, well, I'm not racist, so I'm good. But as the conversation has moved to being anti-racist, I'm not always sure what that looks like. What in your mind do you think it would look like to be anti-racist, and not just not racist, but truly against racism?
Great question. Great question. I got two things for us to consider. One is, I think we got to be proactive about fact checking information that we get. Consider the source, right? There's a lot of times where racism is perpetuated because people are saying things about a group of people that's not factual. And so and people don't take the time to research to find out whether these things that are being said are true. So I think in order to be anti-racist, you have to put yourself in a position to not receive everything that's being fed to you, but to really do. And you mentioned it earlier about doing your research concerning Juneteenth, because you wanted to find out on your own, because everybody's experience with different people groups differ from person to person and situation to situation. And so what may happen with one person doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be your story. And also, even when you don't have interactions with people and you want to find out their history, and you want to find out different things that they're doing, I mean, it's up to us to really be proactive and not be passive, because mainstream media will continue to feed us the things that gets them ratings, and it's always bad news and negative things. But if we really want to find out the truth about things, oftentimes we have to search for truth. We have to step out, and we have to really find out whether what we're being told is true. So that's one way I think that can help the whole idea of anti-racism. The other thing is, and I think that our relationship is a testament to it, is learn how to fellowship with one another, right? We, Pastor Alex and his beautiful wife Darby, we've hung out, we've had dinner together, we broke bread, or we fellowshipped in each other's churches, and so those are also proactive measures to kind of dispel any myths that perhaps you may have had based on your background, and myths that I may have had based on my background, right? And so I think that we really need to be intentional about spending time with people that don't look like us, that have different cultural backgrounds, and we'll find that we have so many more likenesses versus the differences that we had.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I found that just sharing meals with anyone just builds so many bridges. It tears down so many barriers, whether that's someone from a completely different faith or just someone from a different background than myself. How do you think we should practically? And because sometimes I think it's real easy for me to go online and be like, I stand with my Black friends and neighbors and coworkers. It's really easy to post that on social media, but what does that actually look like on an everyday basis? And I think sometimes it's hard for me, and I'm sure it's hard for some of my people to be like, so what does that look like on an average day at work? Like, can you share maybe some practical ways that we can be good allies to our Black coworkers and neighbors, our family members, our friends, our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I have two words I want to throw out there. One is consistency, and the other one is empathy, right? So let's deal with the consistency piece first. Is that, oftentimes I remember when the George Floyd tragedy took place. I probably received a call from every white pastor, every white person that I knew,
Yeah.
to express their sympathy, right, and their concerns, right. And I was grateful for the call. I mean, they didn't have to do it. But as the hype kind of waned, so did the passion for the communication, right? There was no consistency, right? It's kind of like when a person dies. This was the analogy I heard, and I thought it was really good. When a loved one dies, when it happens within a certain time period, you're getting all kind of cards and you're getting all kind of visits and phone calls and things of that nature, as if after 2 or 3 weeks after this tragedy happens, that you no longer feel the grief that you feel. But the reality of it is that because people are not consistent with supporting people through their grief, they feel like they're alone a couple weeks after the incident.
Yeah.
And we so I believe that sometimes being a Black man, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think I can speak for a large majority, is that it's only it seems the relationships between across the racial lines only seem to matter when there's a tragedy. There's no consistency, right? Let's have the same type of passion that we had during the George Floyd time, during the time of peace, during the time of just there's nothing going on. Like,
Yeah.
I still want to see how my Black brother and sister in Christ is doing, and I want to see how my white brother and sister in Christ is doing. Like, let's just say consistent. Let's just share that passion all across the board. And I think that will help. Very practical, right? But the same way we make attempts to communicate with people that we're close to, you make the attempts to communicate with people that you're not so close to, right? Just that consistency. The other thing is empathy, right? Is to try to walk a mile in our shoes, right? It's very hard. There are some challenges that both white, Black, Chinese, whomever, they deal with just living in this sinful world. But there are certain things that are just kind of particular to the Black struggle. And so, for example, going into stores and being followed around, or driving a certain kind of car and certain assumptions made about what you do based on the car that you drive. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen to other people, but it's much more likely to happen to us. And that kind of creates a hard shell, right? And so sometimes when you interact with people, empathize with the fact that you don't know what that person's been through throughout the course of their day, right? And so sometimes it takes a little bit longer for somebody to trust, and somebody to open up, and somebody to be vulnerable. And so I think when we really empathize with other people's plights, we're able to really break those barriers down, and the person will feel comforted and supported in knowing that you're at least trying to attempt to identify with some of the challenges that they've been going through. And I think that there's also true vice versa, because just because you're white doesn't mean that you are carefree, right? That things don't work out. And so we ought to learn to empathize with one another, be consistent with one another, right? The yin and the yang. We need to make sure that we look out for one another. Similar to, again, I'll reference our relationship. We used to call each other for prayer requests. You would reach out to me, I would reach out to you, because we both needed prayer. It was just different kinds of prayers for different situations. So we were able to empathize and sympathize with one another. And that's why we have such a good, fruitful relationship.
Yeah, that's helpful, Gerald. And at the same time, it's very challenging, because even as you're talking, I'm thinking of like, I need to be better. I need to be better. And so thank you for sharing that. I wanted to give you an opportunity because I know you've done conversations like this in different forums in the past, and you've answered many of my questions in the past. But is there anything you haven't been asked just around this topic of like how to be better allies to our Black brothers and sisters and neighbors and friends and coworkers, or around racial reconciliation? There's something you wish you were asked and you never get asked it. Maybe we're just completely blind to it. Is there something you'd like to share like that?
Yeah, actually, I would. The one thing that I'm never asked is about how an adult should teach their children how to coexist, right? So, if we want to be cycle breakers, if we want to be people who kind of stop the narrative in its tracks, we have to start to leave a legacy of training our younger children on how to treat one another. And oftentimes we're concerned about how the adults treat each other, but we need to look back in the other generations. Like, what are some of the things that should happen? Like one of my white brothers and sisters say, hey, listen, what can I teach my 3-year-old child now so that as they grow up, it's already kind of ingrained in them?
Yeah.
Or what kind of ways do you think that I could help our children to interact with Black children, with other ethnicities, so that they don't have to face the same challenges that adults have? Because segregation is real, right? Racism is real. All those things are real, but we have an opportunity, right? As the old saying goes, when we know better, we do better.
Mm.
But the doing better is not just for us. The doing better is to be able to do better and to be able to teach better.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the questions I've never been asked is how do we teach our children? How do we engage them? How do we have the conversation with them? How do we challenge them as well to have these good interracial relationships and things of that nature? So, I mean, there's probably a myriad of other things if I had an opportunity to think long enough. But when that question was initially asked, that's the first thing that came to my mind.
Yeah, that's and I don't know if I've heard anyone talk a great deal about that. You're right. We're usually talking about how to improve adult relationships, and interactions. And really, if we want to move forward culturally, generationally, we're going to have to raise our children differently. And so, now, do you look to the younger generations and see hope? Do you feel hopeful?
Hmm. Unfortunately, I don't, and I'll tell you why. Because we haven't done a good job of training our children, right, as the word says, in the way that they should go. We have not, because we have been so preoccupied with all the things that are going on with us. We've kind of neglected them and left them to themselves. So when you leave them to themselves, then you leave them to social media. You leave them to all the other influences, and so they're learning on the fly. I'm reminded of the story in the passage in Deuteronomy 6, where it talks about how that the parents and the family should be walking down the street talking about the Lord, talking
Mm.
about things that are helpful, talking about things that are enriching. And so, since everybody is always on the paper chase trying to work these extra hours to
Yeah.
pay these bills, nobody's walking
Side
with their
hustle.
children and telling
Yep.
them anything,
Yeah.
right? And so we've left them to their own devices. And so I'm not hopeful. I work in a
Okay.
high school and I see certain things happen. I see the interaction. I see the lack of social structure. I see all those things. So I'm not hopeful in humanity. However, I'm hopeful in Jesus. And
Yeah.
I know that he can make all things new. And I know that nothing that goes on this earth is without his superintendence. I know that he sees, he knows all things, and I know that he is depending on us, the ones who do know, the soldiers in the army, to really be impactful in this world. So he can take what we have, he can take our little and make it a lot. So I'm not hopeful in humanity, but I'm hopeful in God.
I like that. I think that's a great place to end. Not hopeful in humanity, but hopeful in Jesus. Pastor Gerald, thank you so much for your friendship. Thank you especially for taking this time to talk with my church and with me this morning. I'm so grateful for you. We pray for Proclamation Community Church and you and your family. And this is very special to me that you were willing to do this. and this is very valuable to me, and I believe to my people as well. So thank you. Happy Juneteenth, and thank you so much for sharing with us some of your wisdom.
Pastor Alex and Horizon, thank you so much for just your ear. And I just want to let you know you've been a huge blessing to our church, and not only in your prayerful support, but also financial support. And so our prayers to be faithful stewards of God's people's money. And so I just want to let you know that your money is going far here in the Northeast. And God is allowing us to do some real big things, and people are being blessed. So thank you so much for your love and support. And just look forward to the next time we can fellowship.
Thank you, Gerald.